In this video, we're going to be talking about the quadratic formula and how it's represented in our quadratics. So finding x-intercepts and finding out how many roots we have before even graphing them. Okay, so here's our quadratic formula. Remember, our a, b, and c come from our standard form of our quadratic equation. So ax squared plus bx plus c. It's always those numbers that sit in those positions. Okay, I would suggest when typing this b in, you put it in parentheses just so that you don't mess up squaring a negative number. So try to remember whenever you take a letter out and put a number in that you're using parentheses. Okay, so discriminants. When we're graphing a parabola, it is possible to have two x-intercepts, one x-intercept or none. So one solution, two solutions, or none. The discriminant of a quadratic equation will tell you how many roots your quadratic equation will have. So it will tell you how many times it crosses the x-axis. Okay, this is found by looking at what's underneath the radical. So if we just do this part here, it will tell me how many times I will cross that x-axis. Okay, so 2 roots, so if my b squared minus 4ac is bigger than 0, I will have 2 roots, which means it will cross twice. Okay, if it is equal to 0, it will have 1 real root, so it will cross once. If it is negative or less than 0, we will have no real roots, so it will float above it or it will float below it. Okay, so my first set here, my a is 4, my b is negative 16, my c is 3. So I'm just using the part that's underneath the radical, so my b squared minus 4ac. So whenever I take a letter, put in a number, I make sure I use parentheses. So b squared minus 4 times my a times my c. Okay, I could type that straight to my calculator as long as I use parentheses if I'm doing it the long way. This gets me 256 minus 48. 256 minus 48 gets me 208, which is bigger than 0. So I'll have 2 real roots. So it will cross my x-axis twice. My next one, you have to get it in standard form to do it. So we're going to subtract this 2x over. And remember, when we write it, it goes ax squared plus bx, so x squared then x, then my number. So you have to get it equal to 0 before you do your quadratic part. So a is 9, b is negative 2, and c is 4. So I've got my b squared minus 4 times a times c. So I've got 4 minus 144, so negative 140, which is less than 0, so we have no real roots. So it would either be floating above it or below it. Okay, my last one, it's in x squared, x, and my number, so a is 1, b is negative 18, and c is 81. So b squared minus 4 times a times c. This gets me 324. I use parentheses because if you don't use parentheses and you type this in your calculator, it will give you a negative 324, which is wrong. And this is 324. So that gets me 0, so I will have 1 real solution. So I will touch that x-axis once, and then I will go away from it. Okay, find the number of roots and what the x-intercept is. So we got to subtract this 28 over first. It goes x squared, then x, then my number. So a is 1, b is negative 12, and c is negative 28. So negative b squared minus 4 times a times c. So 144 plus 112, so 256. So I should have 2 real answers. So I'm going to go back to my original where it's equal to 0, and I'm going to try to either factor it, complete the square, or use quadratic formula. So we're going to practice just using quadratic formula today. Okay, so I'm going to use that same a, b, and c right here, and I'm going to keep it going. So I've got x equals, my quadratic formula is x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Well, we've already found that to be that 256. So I'm just filling in the rest of it. So when I plug a negative 12 in for a negative b, it changes to positive, plus or minus the square root of 256 all over 2 times my a value of 1. If you press the fraction button in your calculator, if you have the yellow calculators, it will prompt you for your top and bottom. So 12 plus or minus the square root of 256. I check this one first. That gets me a pretty number of 16. 2 times 1 on the bottom gets me 2. And then I can go into my split because I have all good numbers and no square roots. So I do 12 plus 16 over 2. And I do 12 minus 16 over 2. 12 plus 16 is 28. Divided by 2 is 14. 12 minus 16 is negative 4, divided by 2 is negative 2. So those are my two real answers of where it would cross at. My next one here, so I've got b squared minus 4 times a times c. So 484 minus 484, so 0. So I should have one real solution. So when I do my x is equal to, I use the same a, b, and c. So my b is, when I plop it in for a negative b, it becomes negative 22 plus or minus the square root of 0, because I already found what's underneath the square root, divided by 2 times my a, which is 1. Well, the square root of 0 is just 0, so he can kind of disappear. 2 times 1 gets me 2, and if I divide it, I get negative 11, which is one real answer. Okay, don't have to solve anything, it's equal to 0, so I've got a is 2, b is 4, c is negative 5. So b squared minus 4 times a times c. So 16 plus 40, I get 56, which is bigger than 0, so I should have two real solutions. So I got x is equal to negative, I plop in my b, plus or minus the square root of 56 all over 2 times my a, which is 2. X is equal to, I got to break down that 56. So, got 2 and 28. This I could do 7 and 4, 2 and 2. So 2, 2, 2, 7. Pair them up, one escapes, one dies. So I have 2, and then 2 times 7 left in there is going to get me 14. So negative 4 plus or minus 2 square root 14. 2 times 2 gets me 4. And all of my outside numbers are divisible by 2. So we're going to simplify that. So all of these numbers I can take out a 2. So I got x is equal to negative 2 plus or minus 1 square root 14 over 2. Do not divide what's under the square root. It has to be the number in front if we're trying to simplify. Okay, my next one here. A is 1, b is negative 16, c is 4. So b squared minus 4 times a times c. $256 minus 16 is 240. So we got two real solutions. So x is equal to, plop a negative 16 for negative b, it becomes positive, plus or minus the square root of 240 over 2 times a. We got to break down that 240 again. Let's do 12 and 20, 10 and 2, 5 and 2, 6 and 2, 3 and 2. So if I take all of those, 3, 2, 2, 5, 2, 2, I pair, one escapes, one dies, one escapes, one dies. So I had 2 2s escape. Got that 3 and that 5 left inside, so 15, and then those 2's become a 4. So I've got 4 square root 15. So x equals 16 plus 4 square root 15 all over. 2 times 1 gets me 2. And since all of these numbers are now divisible by 2, I can simplify. So x equals 8 plus or minus 2 square root 15. Do not divide the square root. Let's move that 20x over. I write my x squared first, then my x, then my c. So my a is 4, my b is 20, my c is 25. So b squared minus 4 times a times c. So 400 minus 400. So I should have one real solution here. So I've got x is equal to negative b. So my b is 20. So negative 20 plus or minus the square root of 0 all over 2 times my a. He'll go away because it's a 0. So x equals negative 20 over 8. So if we simplified, negative 5 over 2. Okay, I divided 4, divide by 4, so 5 over 2. Alright, let's bring that 5 over. It looks like we can combine him with this negative 4. And then we got to write it in order. So 9x squared, I'm going to put him next. Negative 4 plus 5 gets me 1. So my a is 9, my b is negative 6, and my c is 1. So b squared minus 4 times a times c. So 36 minus 36. I got one real solution again. So I've got x is equal to negative 6, and for negative b it becomes positive. The square root of 0 over 2 times a. He'll go away. X is equal to 6 over 18. They're both divisible by 6, so 1 over 3. Okay, let's bring that 2 over. So negative 12x squared plus 5x plus 2. So my a is negative 12, my b is 5, my c is 2. So b squared minus 4 times my a times my c. So 25 plus 96. 121, so we should have two real solutions. So I got x is equal to negative b plus or minus the square root of that number over 2 times my a. X is equal to negative 5 plus or minus the square root of 121 is 11. 2 times negative 12 gets me negative 12, or negative 24. And then we go into our split since we were able to square root. So I've got the positive 11 side and the negative 11 side. Negative 5 plus 11 gets me 6. And then that simplifies to negative 1/4. Negative 5 minus 11 gets me negative 16, which simplifies to 4/6 to 2/3. Okay, subtract that 9x. Make sure you do your x squared, then your x, then your number. A is 4, B is negative 9, C is 7. So B squared minus 4 times A times C. So 81 minus 112. We get negative 31, so we will have no real solutions. Okay, so we do not need to do our quadratic formula because I shouldn't have an answer. I'll get a negative under my square root because he would go on my negative and I would get an error.